Please welcome Paul Amadeus Lane, Bryce Johnson, Emma Larson, James Rath, and Sam Thompson.
Hello. How's everyone doing today? How's everybody enjoying their E3? Awesome. I'm so glad you guys came out. We have a very, very informative panel about something that we're all passionate about, and that's accessibility in gaming and also inclusion. So we are going to have a great discussion. Hopefully we're able to offer some insight on accessible gaming and inclusion and find out some of these great gamers right here who are part of the disabled community and find out their stories as well too. So I thought I'll start off with a question for our gamers. And I know there's a question on everybody's mind right now when you saw everybody come out, and it has to do with gaming. We have James here. James is an awesome gamer. And James, why don't you let ones know about your disability and also how you got introduced into gaming?
Yeah, so I'm legally blind since birth, and so that basically just means that I see very differently from how anyone else would, and I can't correct my vision. So the way I see is constantly in vertigo and light overexposing my vision and constantly out of focus. So my earliest memory is actually Pokemon when I was 2 years old. And so Pokemon, I had the Game Boy with like the magnifier and like the lights shooting down at the Game Boy, and Pokemon was easy to kind of be introduced to because it was accessible. I could take my time with it. It was an RPG, and so that's what kind of got me into RPGs and into gaming in general.
Nice. So Emma, let's go to you now. How did you get introduced to gaming? And please, if you can explain about your disability.
My disability is called arthrogryposis. It's pretty much a locking in the joint, so I have limited mobility in my lower extremities. What pretty much got me into gaming is honestly my brothers. I would always watch them play Mortal Kombat and stuff like that, and I would always be like, I want to play, and they'd be like, no. So I would start playing it when they were gone, and then they would come home and they'd be like, oh, well, we're going to play. And I'd be like, well, I want to play with you. So I started winning, and I started getting better and better and better, and then eventually they ended up giving me their GameCube, and it's gone downhill from there.
Now, is it because you beat them so bad they gave it to you?
I think so.
They
won't admit it.
That's what it was. And in our conversation of talking about accessible gaming, I know, James, what makes a game accessible for you is not the same for Emma or not the same for me. So let's talk about that, James. What makes a game accessible for you?
Yeah, so the very popular games these days oftentimes have realistic graphics, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything to me. So what makes a game easier for me to see and play is when things are solid colors or have particle effects that highlight what I need, what my target is or my objective. A game that I play heavily is Splatoon 2, and that's because it's the two very bright solid colors that contrast each other, and so I play that fairly competitively. And I even came here last year and I won a whole Splatoon press tournament, which was kind of crazy because people saw me come up with my cane and they did not know what to expect whatsoever. And it was really just, I play with sound as well. Auditory stereo sound makes it very easy for me to find objects in shooters and hear my way around the game. Same thing with fighters as well. So Smash Brothers, Mortal Kombat, any of that.
Awesome. Emma, what makes the game accessible for you?
Pretty much any game that's not the Kinects or the VR systems, because most of those register your whole body. And obviously I can't move my lower body, so when I try to do the VRs, when it tells you to turn around, I can't turn around, so it doesn't work.
I'll tell you a funny story about me with Kinect. I was playing Kinect Sports, and I got real good with the tennis, right? Mm-hmm. So I started playing online. So one day I wanted to have a match with someone. He was from Poland. So I'm all geared up, ready to go. And he finally sees me, and I'm like sitting down, right? So the first question he said was, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "Yes." I said, not because I'm lazy, but because I'm disabled. But I ended up beating him that day. He wouldn't play me again. So, but I definitely hear you. Thank you guys both for sharing that with me. Now let's talk to ones behind the scenes, software and hardware. So Sam, we'll start with you. From your perspective, Sony Worldwide Studios, let's talk about the approach that you guys take with first development studios such as Naughty Dog, Guerrilla, and also Santa Monica Studios. And the guidance that you guys take when it comes to accessible gaming, inclusion, and some of the principles that you guys go by to make sure that gaming is inclusive for all.
That's a big question. What we do at Worldwide Studios is we try to look at the design of the product. We think about inclusivity from our design and development pipeline, and we don't look at trying to solve disabilities per se. And so that's like looking at all the different unique aspects of our products and try to figure out a more meaningful interaction. I think if you look at God of War, what that team did with the chisel door bypass, that was a really heavy, fine motor skill use in some of the larger door puzzles that use 3 or 4 chisels. And being able to simplify that was just the right thing to do. And it made that whole mechanic so much more inclusive for everybody, not just for those with motor skill impairment. At the Naughty Dog side, we have a lot of great people internally that are so passionate about accessibility. And so what we do is we've developed a core set of tools that we use to fundamentally ship Uncharted 4, A Thief's End. And then we've looked at that as the foundation now. And for The Last of Us Part 2, we're going to try to expand on that tool set a great deal. But every team in the studio, and the Worldwide Studios in Sony, is at a different level. And what's exciting about this right now is just how many opportunities out there are for knowledgeable people to come in and really get all of our development teams excited about different levels of accessibility support. And I think that's just this groundswell of momentum that we've seen across the board with both Microsoft and Sony and even Nintendo, where you just get a lot of people that have become completely aware that this is something that we've been horrible at over the years, and we just have to make a change. So it's just working with people that know the disabilities. It's getting teams excited and evangelizing at the core level. It's starting early. Don't try to tack something on at the tail end of your schedule. You have to be mindful of inclusivity from the onset of your project. And you have to bring people in with those disabilities that can tell you how things feel. Don't assume you know what the disabled community wants from your products. Ask them. They'll tell you. And then it's just make sure you evangelize and fight for those features to make sure they get in the final product. But that's, in a nutshell, I guess, a little bit of how we approach it.
Absolutely. We definitely appreciate that. And Bryce, let's talk about the hardware side now. You got something in on your lap right now.
Yes, I have.
And
the Xbox Adaptive Controller.
Yeah, talk about that journey of getting that to where it is today.
Well, I think it's actually what Sam says around recognizing when we exclude people, and that's actually a huge part of the journey. I mean, I'm first going to show a traditional controller, I think one that we're all kind of familiar with in this form. But when we examine this thing through the lens of like inclusivity, you realize that this makes a lot of assumptions on its use. You have 2 hands to hold it. You have to have 2 thumbs to use the sticks. You have to have a fluid range of motion to be able, and fine motor control to hit all the little buttons. And you have to be able to hold it for a long period of time. And when you look at this, even though, this form of controller everyone loves, well, not everyone, most people love, we have to recognize that this can sometimes be the barrier. And that led to the development of the Xbox Adaptive Controller. So while a lot of people love traditional controllers, we wanted to create something that allowed people to externalize all the functions of a controller so that they could build a controller that they wanted. A lot of the times we work with an organization called Warfighter Engaged, and they're an amazing organization. They work with vets a lot, and vets will come to them that have been injured in service, and they'll say, I need a one-handed controller. And the guys at Warfighter Engaged are like, well, why only one hand? What else you got? Because they encourage people to use other parts of their bodies and other inputs. And it's been really very insightful for us to think about how we can have new types of game input and how we would build a device that would support those things really quickly.
Awesome. And Sam and Bryce, you guys can chime in on this too. When it comes to the movement that we see now with more awareness when it comes to either accessible game features or accessible controllers, why do you think there's more awareness now than it was maybe 5 or 10 years ago?
Well, for us, it was funny. I've done usability testing almost my entire career, and we would do 20 or 30 tests a year. And I just never thought about inclusive design. We were testing all of these different parameters, but not once did I think about someone that might not be able to interact with our product the same way. And so it really took, Josh Straub gets a lot of credit because he reached out to Alex and Em at the studio and described his situation with Uncharted, I think it was Uncharted 2, where he was having issues with some QTE sequences. Anyway, that one conversation basically started everything because we had never considered it before. And I think what you see in the media right now, what you see in the movement is that people are really starting to understand that we have been a closed wall industry for too long, and that we can't leave everybody behind anymore, and that we want everybody to be able to enjoy the products we make. And the only way to do that is to think about how we make them differently.
Absolutely.
And so just for us, though, it took that one, and I would encourage everybody to, if you have issues with a game or issues with an experience on a console, reach out. Be vocal about it, because sometimes we just don't hear that feedback.
Yeah.
But once we do, that's all it took, was a few really passionate people, and everything else is history. And I think we're seeing it across the board in the industry that way. Awesome. I don't know if Bryce has probably got a similar story.
Very similar, and I think from a different aspect too, for us at Microsoft, our corporate mission is to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. And we take that really literally. So when you look at the world and think 7.4 billion people, 1.2 billion of those people have a disability of some kind. If you don't intentionally include people with disabilities, we're never going to reach that mission. So for us, that's how we go about everything.
That's true.
That's
and
awesome.
when it comes to being able to game with a disability, like all, if ones don't even have a disability, is the social aspect of gaming. The way you feel when you game. The way you feel when you can beat up on able-bodied people. That's what I'm talking about. And James, talk about the social aspect of gaming and what it has meant for you.
Yeah, no, it's definitely been an outlet to connect, to kind of just be able to play with your peers. I mean, growing up, again, playing Pokemon in the neighborhood, there's like 6 other kids across the street who we all link up with and then battle, and then we'd take it on to the Nintendo 64 and play that way. And it was just something we could all play. My brother is also visually impaired as well, not as like to my degree, but you know, he can't play some games as well. And so eventually we found other games that we'd play and try out. And a lot of those realistic shooters were a little hard, but Halo, for example, just red versus blue was easier to see for us. And we were able to play that pretty casually and have fun. And even nowadays, like with Uncharted, with Thief mode, we were able to like really experience that and have like a lot of fun being able to play when all the textures were just wiped out, and then things are just solid colors if it's an enemy or if it's an ally or something to interact with. So it really does bring people together. Even for instance, when the Switch launched, I bought a game called 1-2 Switch, and it was a game that doesn't require you to look at the screen at all once you're through the menus. And so I had my blind friend Tommy, who's been totally blind since birth, and we played a 1-2 Switch together where we just had to look each other. Well, okay, that's ironic, but we'd face each other, and we did a whole video on YouTube of like how we played 1-2 Switch, and it was just so much fun. It was his first time playing a Nintendo game his entire life, and he's like probably in his 50s or something, but it really brings people together. And social media nowadays and online multiplayer make it easier to connect and have these discussions about accessibility. So it's been more impactful, I think, in the last 5 years than ever before.
Awesome, and thank you so much for sharing that experience. And Emma, talk about the social aspect of gaming for you, besides beating up on your brothers.
Well, the social benefits pretty much of gaming is I can play a game just like everybody else, and I've made tons of new friends by doing that, and none of them know that I'm disabled until I told them. And what was actually pretty cool about that is recently I was talking to one of my other friends. His name is Shane, and he's from Canada. Well, I was talking to him about like, oh man, I broke my wheelchair and stuff. He's like, oh, your wheelchair broke too. And it was at that point that I realized that I actually met a couple of other disabled gamers, and I didn't even realize it because nobody knows until you tell them.
That's true. That's true. That's so true.
So I can pretty much fit in.
Yeah, and I've had similar experiences with that too. It's the social aspect of it. I was able to share my story at PlayStation a few weeks back, and I talked about when I got into gaming about how it's like I found my long-lost friend because that was missing in my life when I started gaming. So it definitely has a real impact on our lives. And so you brought up a very good point about ones who may have different challenges, different games that will reach out to you. You guys did something pretty amazing when it came to God of War post-launch, where you guys put an accessibility patch in.
Yeah.
You mind talking about that at Santa Monica Studios, just the work that went involved with that?
Absolutely. Well, so you know, that team had always envisioned the game, and trying to find ways to make it more accessible. But there are different development cycles and different ways to approach it. And the post-patch was a great way to say, okay, let's get the game, let's get it through final submission, and then how do we look back now and say, okay, we have all of our resources, let's apply them to a number of ways that we could make the game more accessible. Like the camera sway thing was something that the team had thought about early on that they wanted to add in, but just having the resources to do it, it's a great approach, right? What I love about the God of War features is kind of the principle of what inclusive design should be, and it's don't remove the challenge. Don't make games less, right? We want everybody to experience that thrill of being able to complete something and not water down the experience for them. That's not what people want. They just want to have, everybody has a different way of approaching that situation. And what the God of War team did so well is look at their game in context and say, what do we need to do to make it more playable, but yet not really remove the challenge, not take away the things that makes God of War God of War. And that's what I think is so admirable of what that studio did. But whether you do it at the end of the cycle, at the beginning of the cycle, so long as you do it, and with every time you do it, you take those tools and you roll it into the next project and they become more robust and you get more feedback from great players, it just keeps growing. So it was such a great thing to see the team prioritize that, put it in at the end, and still get it to gamers in a reasonable amount of time so that they can enjoy the product. It was really nice.
Absolutely, and I have a suggestion for one more patch if we can.
All right.
I'm a huge fan of Christopher Judd. I loved him as Tilk on Stargate SG-1.
All right.
Can we have him say, indeed?
I think that's a Corey call, but
okay, we'll talk to Corey about that. But it's pretty
know.
awesome, and thank you so much for sharing that. And Bryce, any feedback you've gotten from the Xbox Accessible Controller that may have helped you guys to say, okay, we can tweak this or tweak that, or just the feedback from the community in general?
Well, we've been in development of this device for 3 years, and we had many organizations with us along the way, like Able Gamers, Special Effect, Warfighter Engaged, the Cerebral Palsy Foundation, and Craig Hospital. So it was vital for us to have those partners so that we could create a device that worked in all of their situations, because they all work in really unique ways. I think now, as we kind of move forward, I can't patch hardware as much. But what we do have in front of us is an opportunity now to work with our third-party partners on proper peripherals for this device. And so thinking about what you need in a button, or what you need in a joystick, or what you need in something that might not be a button or a joystick, those are the types of things that I think are really valuable not only to us, but to the sort of vast array of partners that we're working with on things that plug into this.
Awesome. And James, I know you and I talked about the consistency with releases. And why don't you share your viewpoint about that, please?
Yeah. So I have a lot of experience on the Nintendo side. I do jump between PlayStation and Xbox a lot, but from my experience, a lot of games will come out and will have some sort of assist or accessibility feature, and then next thing you know, the next release does not. Or maybe like one game will offer like text size changes, and then the other one doesn't. Or maybe that studio's next game doesn't, or the publisher. And so I think it's so important to consider, like, if you're going to be using gyro controls in a game, for example, but then have the option to turn it off, make sure the following game is also going to allow you to turn off those gyro controls, because then you're alienating a part of your audience that may have played the first game, but can't play the next one. So I think it's just important to be consistent with accessibility throughout your releases and patches, and I see that especially on the hardware side too, where when you make a new piece of hardware, sometimes the operating system might not be the same as the previous platform. So make sure you're able to port those accessibility features on the hardware or the OS side as well. I find it very easy to do gaming on mobile as well, because like with iOS and Android, you have all these accessibility features built in, and a lot of developers have the tools to make their games accessible. I guess it depends on the engine, but at least Apple and Google provide those accessibility tools to include in your apps. So. Well
said. And Emma, what's your take on that?
I partially agree with him that games need to stay consistent with their accessibilities, because like the VR systems, I was noticing that during E3, there was a couple of the VR systems that were up, and some of them you had to walk around, turn around, bend down, do all of that, and then the other ones I was seeing, they were sitting down, and you just had to turn your body left to right. But I do agree with James that games need to have the option to be able to turn stuff off, turn them back on. pick what you need to work for your disabilities.
I mean, there's like a little sticker on the game of me to show that it was accessible. Me or you with a sticker? What do you think?
Both of us.
Both of us. We'll do it. We'll put James in it too. But Sam, I wanted to bring up something too. What you guys were able to do with Uncharted 4, A Thief's End, for a AAA title as that in a project was just awesome. Are you using those same tools and philosophies for other projects, and what do fans have to look forward to with The Last of Us Part 2?
Oh man, that's a good question. So absolutely, we took that original tool base. Naughty Dog is so passionate about accessibility to begin with, and they have so many great champions internally now at the studio that just have worked it into our development philosophy, normally. So we have a great number of features that we identified in U4, some things we couldn't do. So I think you're going to see a lot more accessible and accessibility features, a lot more accessible gameplay and accessibility features in The Last of Us Part 2. We have some surprises to share later on, but no, I can't talk about it right now. But I think the team is really dedicated to try to make these experiences as inclusive as they can, and they're going to great lengths to do that. What we're seeing on the studio level at Sony is all the teams now are really getting involved in this and really wanting to make a change in how they develop products to make sure that they're accessible for everyone. So we're seeing a lot more consultants coming in. We're bringing in a lot more people that have great opinions and views in terms of how we can make console and software a more enjoyable experience for everyone. And I think every one of our games going forward, you're going to see a huge increase in that support.
And to offer accommodation to Microsoft and also PlayStation, I know last year I was involved with the first ever accessible game meetup at PSX 2017, where we invited a bunch of the disabled community there with some developers as yourself and others, just so that we can have a meet and greet and talk about things that are challenging for us.
Yep.
And Bryce, I want to offer accommodation for what Microsoft did with that controller. I mean, that is just a game changer, and it brings really tears to my eyes as a person who thought I would never be able to game again. But because of technology that Microsoft has and what PlayStation is doing, it's bringing hope and light to a lot of ones out there who used to game or ones who thought they could not game. So I just want to sincerely offer my accommodation to both organizations, and what you guys are doing is awesome.
Oh, thank you.
And in closing, we got a few minutes left. So what I want to do in closing is, let's say there's ones out there who are in the behind the scenes of making video games who are not on board with gaming inclusion and accessible gaming. What kind of advice would you give them? We'll start with you, Bryce.
I honestly, the advice that I think I would give is that we talk a lot about addressing biases and recognizing that we unintentionally include people is not something that's really easy. I think it's really easy to kind of go out there and say, hey, check your biases or whatever, but I think, to really change the way that you approach problems takes work. And I want to give people the latitude to basically go out there and give themselves some space to actually be able to make that change and recognize that it is a journey in the way that you think. Yeah. And it takes time.
Sure does. And Sam?
I think that's a great point. I think from our perspective, try to do what you can. Start slow. Don't try to solve every disability. Don't try to fix people, right? The idea is to try to build tools that you can use throughout the lifespan of the development process, and not really try to let it overwhelm you. If you go to a game's accessibility checklist and you just start reading things, it's going to panic you. And if you look at it just contextually and what you can do, and make anything is better than nothing, right? So just start thinking about how you design your products and how people are going to interact with them, and bring in more disabled-minded individuals to your playtest so that you can see their feedback as well. And I just think it just takes a couple of just very intuitive people to come in and change everything for you. So just start slow, but do be mindful and try to at least think about that in everything that you do.
That's true. And James and Emma, the last two questions are for you. Ones out there in the disabled community who never thought about gaming, what kind of advice would you give them to take up gaming? They might have been scared. What kind of advice would you give them? We'll go with you first, James. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So I would say do a little bit of research and find what platforms offer accessibility for you. I know like Sony's PlayStation offers like Zoom and some sort of screen reading technology, and so does on the Microsoft side Narrator. On the Nintendo side, there's like invert colors and grayscale, and I'm speaking for the blind community at least, and I know blind gamers who can play these platforms without even ever having to see the screen, and they're able to just do it based on sound cues, and even I can do that at times too. So I would say just have fun and make sure that you research before you invest your money into a platform to make sure it's going to be right for you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Emma, last word.
I would just say do what you love. If you want to try gaming, try to do it. If you can't do something, explore your options, try a different game, try a different style, see what you love to do the most, and if worst comes to worst, you can do what Bryce said and stuff, and just contact them and voice your opinion and voice your issues and tell them, hey, fix this issue.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. We'd like to thank E3 for allowing us to be a part of this event. Thank Jeff Keighley for inviting us to share this story and share this mission. And you guys enjoy the rest of your E3. Thank you.
Thank you.